fight fans, to another episode of BTR Boxing Podcast with me, your host, Sean Bastow, shortly to be joined by Johnston Brown for this Career Profiles episode. And you have voted for the baddest man on the planet, Iron Mike Tyson, as the next instalment of Career Profiles. Before we get into the episode and talk about Mike Tyson's career, please go and follow us on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and please leave us a rating and a review because it really helps us get up Apple podcasting charts, allows people to see us, allows people to get exposed to what we're doing. And you can also find us on Podbean, on Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM, Spotify and Eat Sleep Boxing Repeats YouTube channel. So let's go into this episode. This, as voted for by you, is the career profile of the baddest man on the planet, Iron Mike Tyson.
When the sun rises, I wake up and chase my dreams. I won't regret when the sun sets, 'cause I live my life like I'm a beast.
So this is the next instalment of the Career Profile series and it's been voted for by you. It's Mike Tyson. He was voted for in a poll from heavyweight fighters from different eras, including Rocky Marciano, George Foreman, Sonny Liston as well. So we decided to put these four in because they were heavyweight fighters from different eras. We wanted to mix it up. We wanted to do a different era, and my word, did it cause a stir on social media when we left out Ernie Shavers. So we decided that we wanted to put Foreman in there. We felt Foreman was one of the other heavyweights from that golden era of the 70s that justified going in there as a heavy hitter. Ernie Shavers will get his own career profile at some point down the line, so not to worry friends, we'll get that one out to you at some point as this series runs along. So we've got the baddest man on the planet to talk about today, and another great heavyweight to be discussing his career on. And my word, there's so many bits of information, so many facts, so many figures, so many stories. You know, this is going to be an epic one to do, and I'm really looking forward to doing Tyson because he's one of my favourite fighters growing up. Really enjoyed watching his ferociousness, his ability to cause controversy inside and outside of the ring. One of the greatest fighters, one of them arguably one of the greatest heavyweights. It's a very subjective conversation to have, but Tyson, Johnston, this is Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, the guy that bites off ears, the guy that gets put in prison, the guy that tells people he's going to fuck them until he loves them. But I want to go on.
Oh dear, Iron Mike Tyson, one of the most ferocious and terrifying fighters to ever grace a boxing ring. He was just as terrifying as he was inside the ring as he was outside of it. Arguably one of the greatest heavyweights ever lived. People obviously will make claim that he is. Possibly, who knows? Who knows? A peak Mike Tyson against a Muhammad Ali or a Sonny Liston or you know, whoever you want to stick him in the ring with, he's going to give it a good go, and the chances are he could well knock him out. So what a great fighter! I mean, he was an animal, wasn't he? He literally beat his opponents to the point where, you know, they just couldn't continue. And he was just one of the best heavyweights to ever grace a boxing ring, and a great career profile to be discussing.
Certainly is. So let's start at the beginning. His earlier life. Born Michael Gerard Tyson. He was born on June the 30th, 1966 in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York. He's got an elder brother named Rodney who was born in 1961, and he's also got an elder sister named Denise who unfortunately died of a heart attack at the age of 24 in February 1990. And Tyson's biological father is listed as Purcell Tyson, who was originally from Jamaica on his birth certificate, but the man Tyson actually knew growing up as his father was Jimmy Kirkpatrick, who was from Greertown, North Carolina. He was one of the neighbourhood's top baseball players as well, and he'd married previously and had a son, Tyson's half-brother, Jimmy Lee Kirkpatrick, who would basically help integrate the Charlotte High School football in 1965. In 1959, Kirkpatrick left his family to move to Brooklyn, where he met Tyson's mother, Lorna Mae, who was previously known as Lorna Mae Smith, aka Lorna Mae Tyson. Kirkpatrick frequently visited pool halls. He's a gambler. He hung out on the streets. Tyson spoke about him later on down the line, and he was quoted as saying, "My father was just a regular street guy caught up in the street world." One of the most storied parts of Tyson's career before he ever entered a boxing gym or a boxing ring was his very harsh upbringing. My word, he had it very, very hard.
He did. He had it very hard. He was, being brought up in Bransville, which was the borough was known to be one of the toughest neighbourhoods around at the time. It was, the ghetto. He was witnessing all sorts on the streets. I mean, he even said himself that when he was knocking around as a youngster, that he was involved in sort of muggings and stuff like that, and God knows whatever else. But one particular story when he mentioned how when he would actually describe how he would mug someone and how they would walk past him and they know that he's going to mug them, but they weren't sure, and then he would eventually mug them, and he used to feel like he outwitted them in terms of thinking that they think that he's got on and maybe he won't, and then he would, and he actually quite enjoyed it, he enjoyed outwitting the victims, which is actually quite terrifying to think of, really. Even at a young age, in his teens, if not even probably younger. But it's a tough area, and it was littered with crime, and it was inevitable that eventually, he's going to dabble in it. That's how it works. That's how it works. How the world works. And unfortunately for Mike, he was born in a tough place, and he had to grow up being tough. And he obviously took that all the way through in his career. But yeah, I mean, he had a love for pigeons. That was the one thing that he did have. That was his tender side, if you like, where he would keep pigeons, and that was something he enjoyed doing. And he dabbled in petty crime all the way up until he was sort of 12 years old. So that was his life. And basically, he managed to get himself into boxing as a boy, and he was pretty big. I mean, at 13 years old, he was a heavyweight that was tipping the scales at 200 pounds, and at 13 years old. So that just shows you how much muscle Mike Tyson had, and he was introduced to Customato, who obviously, as we all know, Customato was the guy that steered Gerard Tyson. He was the guy that became the youngest heavyweight champion in his era. And later on, we'll discuss that, he also managed, although he passed, but Mike Tyson went on to also become the youngest heavyweight champion. So it's interesting. I mean, Customato, he was around in the Bronx, and he also had a bit of a troubled upbringing, and he was fighting on the street. So he obviously sees something in Mike Tyson, and he took him under his wing. He see him as a potential heavyweight champion of the world, and he weren't wrong.
No, it was something that he always said to him, that you will go on to be the heavyweight champion of the world. It's very well documented in interviews that Tyson's mentioned about his relationship with Customato. But obviously, Custa took him on knowing that he was on his own. His mother passed away when he was 16 years of age, so Custa took him on as his boxing trainer and his manager and his mentor and his friend, and the person that he helped bring him to the forefront of where he was as a man. Because obviously, as we talked about, he had it tough growing up. The guy, obviously was abnormally different looking for a guy of his age, for a kid of his age, and the fact that he had that lisp as well, that people obviously mock in this day and age, and he even mocks himself in this day and age as well, but back then he was getting bullied for it, basically. And his first fight that he was ever actually involved in was with a bigger youth, because, as he said about his pigeon and his love for pigeons, this youth had basically ripped the head off a pigeon, so Tyson didn't take too kindly to that, so he basically went over and smashed the shit out of this other kid, and that was actually the first ever fight he was involved in. And it's mental to think some of these little intricate details about his career, come out in episodes like this, because these were things that I knew about Tyson. I knew things about him, I knew stories about him, I've read books on Tyson, but it's some of the details that you can't always find out about stories about Tyson's pigeons, one of the pigeons getting the head ripped off and him battering this youth. It was a bit crazy to really read up on, but obviously his life didn't really start off very well on the outset. But when he met Customato, that was different. Customato was the one that nurtured him up until his untimely demise as well. With Cuss, he was the father figure that he never had Tyson. That was something he was very, very evident of when he spoke about him in various interviews. But as he was growing up, he was actually boxing in schools at first, and his emerging boxing ability was actually discovered there by Bobby Stewart, who was a juvenile detention centre counsellor and a former boxer himself, and he considered him to be an outstanding fighter, and he actually trained him for a few months before he introduced him to Costamato, and then it was when he introduced him to Costamato that Tyson ended up dropping out of high school as a junior. And what Tyson then went on to end up doing is training with Costamato, and then eventually going on to obviously Teddy Atlas. There's a story of the Teddy Atlas story is a pretty good one, which we'll touch on in a few moments. But obviously that relationship he had was so significant for what was going to be evident later on down the line. He didn't have a lot of paternal guidance. He had people that were coming and going, his mother passing away, Costamato passing away, and as we touch on a little bit later on down the line about getting involved with the wrong types of people, he would go on to be not just this scary looking very built like a brick shithouse kid, he was also mentally very vulnerable as well.
Yeah, he was, because he was so young. He wasn't very well educated, and he had he'd been brought up in a life of crime. So for him that was the route he was going down. And obviously when D'Amato did take him under his wing, and then obviously Tyson's mother passed, he then became his legal guardian. And the first thing that D'Amato did was take him to his house and get out of the city, and he lived under his roof, as well as being his legal guardian and also his trainer. As you say, he was a big mentor. He took him under his wing, and Tyson, for the first time in his life, he experienced stability, and it was a structured existence for the first time in his life, and basically had the desired effect of curbing that his antics sort of on the street. Although at times he was allowed to go in the weekends, because obviously he had brothers and sisters, he had friends, so he would, he'd go back to the city. And there would be times when Costamato and Jose Torres, who was another guy that Cus trained and was involved with the camp, who wasn't necessarily a trainer, but he was he would help Tyson, and they would literally drive the streets for a few hours or a day or two. Sometimes they'd find him, sometimes they wouldn't. But, one thing with Tyson, he apparently had an eye for the ladies as well. So he used to enjoy coming back to the city and knocking about and with his pals and chasing skirt, basically. That was what Tyson was doing, and probably getting involved in God knows what else. But, it was good for Tyson. I mean, even when Tyson sort of later on, he wasn't completely at the end of his career, but there was one thing that he did say that I picked up on, and it was saying that living with Cus, basically, that value for money was something that Cus had taught him. He did say to him that, money is a force of security, and basically don't put everything, all your trust into it. It basically helps you to get out a lot of problems, but don't rely on it, and be independent. And the main goal is to be your own man and be independent. And then once you've got your family, you're no longer the main person. Your family comes first, and regardless of the situation, your career doesn't come before your family. Your family comes first. So he was teaching the values of money, but I think with Cus, because he sort of died so quickly. He died. What was it? It was in 85, I believe. With pneumonia. Although he was able to nurture Tyson as a fighter, I think he was hoping that he would be able to nurture him also as a person, because he was trying to teach him something he had never been taught before. And it's difficult, because you're picking up a kid in his teens who's been through a lot. How do you manage to, is the intervention too late? And maybe with Cus dying so soon, he was able to show him the values of money and what money was about, which obviously we'll later go on to explain. But, he was a great influence on Tyson, as well as the management team that he eventually put together with Bill Clayton and Jim Jacobs.
So going back to that Teddy Atlas story then, it was an interesting story that obviously Teddy Atlas has spoke about in great detail. So when Teddy Atlas was an assistant to Costamato, he also trained previously as an amateur boxer with Costamato as well. He'd had some amateur fights with him, but he ended up dismissing his career because of a back injury. So he goes on to be a trainer and assistant to D'Amato. So when he was there for, it was only a short period of time, he insisted in the training of obviously the teenage protege, which was Mike Tyson. Now at the time, Mike Tyson was a 15-year-old, hormones through the roof. We're never going to know what really happened, but apparently there was an altercation in which an 11-year-old relative of Teddy Atlas was inappropriately grabbed by Mike Tyson, and as a result of that, Teddy Atlas put a .38 caliber handgun to Tyson's ear and told him to never touch his family again, or he would kill him if he did. That altercation has been confirmed by both Atlas and Tyson in various interviews, and as a result, he was dismissed from the camp and ended up going off to be a trainer in his own right. So that was an absolutely mental story. When I listened back to Teddy Atlas speak about that story, it was like, wow. You know, I knew Teddy Atlas was a bit eccentric as a character, but I never really knew he was this crazy, to be honest with you. That, you know, he basically went and put a gun to Tyson's head, and this is the 15-year-old Tyson, and as you were saying, he was an absolute animal, and he was a beast at 15. You know, he probably would have absolutely annihilated Teddy Atlas, who wasn't really any sort of amateur boxer himself. He didn't really achieve as much in his amateur boxing career, so, you know, Tyson at that age would have absolutely annihilated him, but with a 38 caliber gun to your head, you're not really going to do much in that sense. So as a result of that, Atlas was dismissed from the camp, and obviously, you know, Custamato was his trainer alongside Kevin Rooney, who was also helping out in camp at the time. But as an amateur then, Mike Tyson, he won gold medals at the 1981 and 1982 Junior Olympic Games, defeating Joe Cortez in 1981 and Kelton Brown in 1982. So that was the start of his amateur career. Also, he went to try and go to the 1984 Olympics. Now, if anybody doesn't know about the 1984 American Olympic boxing team, I would highly recommend you go on to Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat's website and check out the Dream Team articles about that particular era and about that particular American team. Tyson wanted to go on that team, but eventually lost out to Henry Tillman, who he got beat off twice as an amateur, losing both bouts by a decision. So that was actually a significant part of his career, because Tyson would go on to do even greater things in the sport than Henry Tillman would, but Henry Tillman was the one that went to the Olympics, strangely enough. So that was Tyson's sort of short but sweet amateur career, and because of how good he was, they wanted to turn him pro.
Yeah, and he did. He turned professional the following year, 19 years old. And he stormed his way through the heavyweight ranks. You know, he was just an animal, basically. He shot through everybody in sort of more or less the first round. I think there was one fight, which was the Larry Sims fight, where it went for 3 rounds. But other than that, he literally blasted everybody out all the way up until he fought James Tillis. But, you know, during that time, obviously, Custard passed away, so he only ever got to see him. I think it was up to the Sterling Benjamin fight when he knocked him out in the first round, which was Mike Tyson's 11th win, and that was when Cuss died. But thankfully, with Cuss, he had obviously brought in, as I mentioned earlier, with Jim Jacobs and Bill Clayton, who were you know, they were successful in advertising, and I think Jim Jacobs was an ex-handball champion, but they were close friends of Cuss's, and they established a company called the Big Fights. And if I remember rightly, I think a lot of their old fight films are actually on YouTube. I think there's a lot of them on YouTube, but it was where Tyson picked up. You know, he would watch the old reels of the old fights, and that was where he found a love for boxing history as well, Mike Tyson, in his early days. I'm sure he probably still does. So he had some old footage that Cuss had, and Bill Clayton and Jim Jacobs, and that was where he got the idea as well in those films to come out in the old-fashioned black robe and just the black shorts. You know, you think about the 80s. Yeah, the 80s was known to be quite colourful, and you know, it was good on the eye, wasn't it, in terms of what people wear. They'd wear all sorts of crazy stuff, you know, all the tassels and everything else. But Tyson, you know, he liked the old school stuff, and he liked the way the old school fighters fought, and that was what he tried to adopt, with head low and good head movement and try and blast people out. And that's where he got the idea to have the old black shorts.
Yeah, so he started his career relatively successful, of course. You know, 1985 consisted of literally a fight nearly every single month of the year, which was, again, we spoke about this a few weeks ago on one of the Legendary Nights episodes. You don't really see a lot of fighters fighting that many times in the first year of the pro career, especially in this day and age. But obviously Tyson, absolutely ridiculous when he fought in 1985. You know, the amount of fights he was involved in, and they were all quick fire fights. So that was the thing, because he was knocking people out for fun, it was easy for him just to get back in the ring really quickly, because he'd hardly broke a sweat beating half of these guys that he was in the ring with. So the first year as a pro, great success. Obviously Cuss died, massive effect on him. Going into 1986 was really where we started to see him come to the forefront of the heavyweight division, really. So he starts to get in there in his first televised fight against Jesse Ferguson.
Tyson's making a mistake by letting himself get this close to Ferguson. He must maintain a little bit of distance so that he's going to take a point. He's disqualifying him. He disqualified Jesse Ferguson for clinching and refusing to break when ordered. He had warned him earlier in this round. Jesse Ferguson refused to break. The referee, Louis Rivera, disqualified him. And ironically, that breaks Mike Tyson's KO string. That will go down in the books as a win disqualification. It will not be his 18th straight knockout.
One of the dubious distinctions of the year. Jesse Ferguson becomes the first of Mike Tyson's 18 professional opponents not to suffer a knockout. And he did it by almost forcing the referee, Luis Rivera, to disqualify him.
Beats Jesse Ferguson, and then, as you say, fights James Quick Tillis in May 1986, and he was the first person to take Tyson the distance. And then we get to one of your good old favourite opponents of Mike Tyson's, Mitch Green, and the story of Mitch Green. Tell it again.
Oh, Mitch Green, he's just an absolutely awesome character. I do love Mitch. He's off his head, he's eccentric as you like, but yeah, Mitch Green, the problem always stemmed from the fact that Mike Tyson reportedly received $250,000 for their fight, whereas Green only made $30,000, and it was actually at the weigh-in the day before of the bout that Green threatened to pull out of the fight, wanting more money. And he basically never let go of it his whole entire life. So in the end, basically, obviously the fight went on. Mitch Blood Green was always partial to a bit of God knows what he was smoking. He was always smoking some sort of all sorts. And yes, later on in his career, there was an altercation with Mike Tyson in Dapper Dan's clothing store, where Mike Tyson knocked him out, which was actually before Frank Bruno fight, which we'll probably move on to sooner or later. And that was where he broke his hand by punching Mitch Green, who basically confronted him in the shop, and he got literally sparked out. He had a massive shiner, and it was printed all over the press in New York in front of every newspaper the next day. You know, Mike Tyson actually broke his hand. He had to postpone the fight with Bruno, but Mitch would never let it go, and he was he's a colourful character. I don't find anyone, have a look at the fight. I mean, he takes Tyson a distance as his claim to fame, but just Mitch Green in general with his eccentric self and some of his bizarre videos that you can find on YouTube of Mitch Green, but colourful character, and one I just always find him really funny and engrossing, basically. But yeah, Tyson went the distance for the second time after Tillis against Mitch Green.
So then he moves on in his career, and in 1986 he actually contested in 12 bouts before he moved on to fight for his first world title. But in the midst of them bouts, he fought the son of the legendary Joe Frazier, Marvis Frazier, in the midst of that. So he beat Marvis Frazier quite handily, and then he beat Jose Ribalta and Alfonso Ratliff before getting his shot at the World Heavyweight crown, the WBC title, at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas against Trevor Berbick, making his second appearance on the Career Profile series. Obviously, we spoke about Trevor beating Muhammad Ali in his final fight of his career, what was a sad affair, but Trevor Berbick in 1986 was the WBC heavyweight champion of the world, and Mike Tyson went in there and absolutely blew him away to become the youngest ever heavyweight champion at just the age of 20 years old.
20 years old, Mike Tyson on his way to becoming one of the youngest heavyweight champions of all time. Bangs the body, wow, with that uppercut is Tyson, catches him with a light left hook, and he goes down! He goes down. He should be able to get up from this. His legs may be shut. They are. As Trevor Berbick falls back in the rope. I don't know if he's going to be able to continue. He's got the heart, but his body won't let him do what his mind wants to. And he's counted out. It'll be scored as a knockout. Mills Lane counted him out to 10. It's all over. We've got a brand new heavyweight champion of the world, Mike Tyson.
Yeah, he was destructive, wasn't he, against Trevor Berbick, who his claim to fame is obviously beating Muhammad Ali, but, an aged Ali, and then he had the title and obviously went on to fight Tyson, and he got absolutely just wasted in 2 rounds, and it was just a ferocious beating from Tyson, and boy did it make him, if he wasn't already, he was potentially going to be a superstar, but at this point it's just made him absolute superstar. And this obviously was a part of the heavyweight Undisputed series, which was produced by HBO and also by Don King. So he was also, that was the first step, which was the WBC title, before moving on against James Smith, and he won the WBA title, unified the division there. Also, obviously a part of that series, Smith had actually beaten Tim Witherspoon in 1986, who had also beaten Frank Bruno in the summer of '86. So that was Bruno's second attempt at a world title. And once again, Mike Tyson, although it went the 12-round distance, it was a pretty one-sided affair. And James Smith, he showed glimpses that actually maybe Tyson could get to him, and it was more about just lasting a distance, and then he did that. But obviously at that point, Mike Tyson then became the WBA and WBC heavyweight champion.
He did. Now, if you've not already heard the interview conducted with James Bone Crusher Smith for The Life and Times of, go and check it out on the feed, because it is there, and I did a little bit of a sit down with him for about 45 minutes to around an hour about his career, about him winning his world heavyweight title, and also about his fight with Mike Tyson, of course. So if you want to go and hear a little bit more about the fight with Mike Tyson, go and listen to that particular episode. It's The Life and Times of James Bone Crusher Smith. So moving on, he then defends the WBC WBA titles against Pinkland Thomas, and then he picks up the IBF to add to that crown by beating Tony Tucker, who was 34-0 at the time in 1987 in Las Vegas, before going on to defend it against Tyrell Biggs. And then a significant moment in his career, beating Larry Holmes in 1988, defending the 3 titles again. And it was this story that we've spoke about before on the Legendary Nights series, when we've covered the Tyson and Douglas fight off. When we've spoke about that particular era of time when Tyson was in, we spoke about the fact that the Larry Holmes fight was significant because of how much he looked up to Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, it was in the ring before that fight literally took place, and was rumoured to have said to him, "Go and get him for me."
What happened, I was very lucky to win. Larry was pretty old at that time, like Ali was old when he fought Holmes.
Yeah.
He was pretty old, and 38, and I was 20. And I won.
And what did Muhammad Ali say to you?
Well, he said, "Get him for me." Yeah, get him for me.
And that was something that always sticks out in my mind as something Tyson spoke about in various interviews. And for me, the win over Larry Holmes was significant because although Larry Holmes was probably past his best at this point, having fought 50 times and lost twice, he was still a guy to be reckoned with. He's still a guy that had respect, that had commanded respect because of what he'd previously done in the heavyweight division. So for Tyson then to go in there and dispatch of Larry Holmes was another fantastic win on his record. But more significantly, the whole Ali being in the ring and saying what he said was quite a big significant thing for me in Tyson's career.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been amazing for Mike Tyson, being looking at Ali as one of his heroes, his idols. So for him to say, to do that to Larry, who was obviously an old sparring partner of Mohammed, it was interesting, but great. I mean, that must have been brilliant. And he actually did. He went in there and battered him for 4 rounds. Holmes had no chance in hell. But, I mean, just before that as well, I mean, Jacobs had died of leukemia in 1988 as well. So this was sort of the signs of the problems beginning to emerge in Mike Tyson's career following the Holmes fight. Obviously, in the audience with that victory over Holmes as well, you had supermodels around. You had Naomi Campbell, and there was also an actress in the crowd called Robin Givens, who 2 weeks later, Tyson and Givens were married. So this is where his life started to take a drastic turn. With obviously D'Amato now gone and Jacobs passed away. It left Bill Clayton as his manager, and obviously Adam Rooney, who was also massively influential in Tyson's career. And then this is where the old Don King started to sniff around, a little scheming promoter who was absolutely terrible for Mike Tyson. He was a horrible person. Let's be honest. What he did was just shocking. I know it is. He probably had just as much information on Mike Tyson and what he got up to as what Tyson had on him. But the one thing is he was just trying to force his way in after this Larry Holmes fight. Robin Givens, obviously now a part of Tyson. She's married to him, so she felt that she had a right now take control of his career. So you had Robin Givens and her mother on one side, you had Don King on the other, and then you had the last remaining of that sort of dream team, or the last two, which was Bill Clayton and Adam Rooney. And Clayton, in actual fact, Donald Trump ended up getting involved in this, which is really crazy. And Donald Trump was trying to guide Tyson apparently to make money and how he could guide his career. But that was someone that Don King had pulled in. So, Don King was trying to pull in people with influence. Everybody's now wanting the Tyson money. They're starting to put these little ideas into Tyson's head as that Bill Clayton's taking money from him. And it was looked into by accountants and lawyers, and nobody ever said Bill Clayton ever did anything wrong. But in the end, Don King was just mustering his way in. Although Bill Clayton did still remain his manager, Tyson was calling the shots. And there's a dreadful interview as well where he's speaking to the cameras and he's sort of saying how he would never have known this was happening to him if it wasn't for his beautiful wife and her mother. And she's there laughing and smiling. It was just so bad and fake. And you could just see that Mike Tyson is blatantly just being completely robbed for all of his money that he's earning. And in his head, he actually believed that what he did is the right thing, which wasn't, and it was just sad. It's actually quite sad to see watching back on some of the footage sort of in the past few days. But Tyson's life was, at this point, was starting to turn for the bad.
Yeah, it certainly was. But during this period of time as well, his notoriety and his fame actually came to the attention of well-known gaming company of the 80s, Nintendo. After witnessing one of Tyson's fights, Nintendo's American president decided that they were so impressed by his power and his skill, they decided that they wanted him to be included in an upcoming game, which was called Punch-Out. So if anybody ever remembers Punch-Out from the 1980s, it was absolutely fantastic at the time. Looking back on it now, it's a shower of shit compared to obviously what we get in this day and age, but that was the big hit at the time, which actually sold over 1 million copies. So Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was also brought out around that period of time in 1987, and then obviously he beat Larry Holmes, as we were speaking about earlier, and then he went on to beat Tony Tubbs in Tokyo, Japan, easy second round TKO. And it was then in June of 1988 where we got the biggest fight of his career, and what some may say is arguably the highest point of Mike Tyson's career, the Michael Spinks fight. So this was a huge fight. It was billed as a super fight. It was a battle of wills. It was Michael Spinks, who was undefeated at the time, who apparently had more of a legitimate claim to being the true heavyweight champion than what Mike Tyson did, even though Mike Tyson was the WBC, WBA and IBF champion at the time, so he was the undisputed champion of the heavyweight scene. But Michael Spinks had a claim to it as well. So Michael Spinks, you will maybe remember Michael Spinks' previous outings before he moved up to the heavyweight division. He was actually a very well established and great light heavyweight champion in the early 80s. But when he moved up to the heavyweight division, he actually beat Larry Holmes for the IBF title, and then beat him a second time in 1986. And then for a third time, he went on to defend the title against Stefan Tangstad in 1986, beating him, but then opted in 1987 to fight Jerry Cooney, and as a result of that, was stripped of his IBF title. So he'd never actually lost his title in the ring. So there was this claim at the time going around that actually Spinks had a better claim than Tyson did, because he was also declared as the lineal champion, whatever that may mean to people in this day and age. He was also declared as that as well. So this fight was obviously a lot bigger, and it was like comparing fights to sort of this magnitude of this day and age. It was probably as big as what Manny Pacquiao Floyd Mayweather was built up to be. This was a huge fight, an absolutely huge fight with so much riding on it. And as I said earlier, for me and for a lot of people, a lot of journalists and a lot of people that love the boxing, this was the pinnacle of Tyson's career. And he went in there and he destroyed Michael Spinks within 91 seconds of the first round, and Michael Spinks looked like a shitting dog in the middle of the ring as Tyson was walking down to it. This was the epitomisation of the fear factor before Tyson had even stepped in the ring, looking at the face of Michael Spinks.
God, yeah, Michael Spinks, that is a picture. That face of him, he just looked absolutely petrified, didn't he? He was beaten before he even stepped in that ring, and then when Tyson got in the ring, I think he just realised, wow, what the hell am I getting myself into here? And as you say, Michael Spinks was, he was well known light heavyweight, and he was a big name, as you say. He hadn't lost that IBF title. He'd vacated it to fight Cooney. So it was interesting. It was a massive fight. It was the biggest fight of boxing at the time, and as you say, it was massive. It was a huge fight, and it was billed once and for all. 700,000 pay-per-view buys on the networks, and 800,000 buys on the closed circuit theatre TV, which generated a revenue of 32 million. Which is the equivalent of 67,790,000 in today's market. So big money, but yeah, it lasted 91 seconds.
The right hand lands to the head of Mike Spinks. It's Tyson all the way here in round number 1. Vicious shots to the body. Nothing really heavy landing yet, but he's taking them. The uppercut, body shot, down goes Mike Spinks for the first time. The count is up to 4 and 5 and 6. And 7 and 8. That was a body shot that took him down. Here comes Mike Spinks in. He leads to the right hand. Down he goes. I don't think he'll get up from this. Mike Spinks is laying flat on his back. The count is up to 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. He won't be able to do it. It's all over. Mike Tyson has won it. Spinks almost fell back through. A dramatic first round knockout for Mike Tyson. Unbelievable strike.
Which it was unbelievable, really, that it got rid of him so quickly. As I say, I don't think Spinks was. I don't think he quite fancied it, to be honest. But this is also the time in June of that year when his wife Robin came out and said that she had Tyson basically was losing his mind and he had beat her up. And it was when Tyson always says that anyone with a grain of sense would know that if I punch my wife, I will rip her head off. It's all lies. I never laid a finger on her. But it was quite ironic that this was the time when she was in a position where she could now take half if she leaves. I'm sure there was no prenuptial signed at this point. So Robin, she left with her mother, and that was after the Spinks fight. And who was he left with? None other than Don King by his side, and that was all that he had. Try and to continue in his career. Obviously, moving on after the Spinks fight was Frank Bruno.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you talk about Don King was the one that he was left with. Obviously, in late 1988, he actually parted ways with manager Bill Caton and fired his long-time trainer, Kevin Rooney. So Kevin Rooney was there from day dot, really. He was working alongside Costamato, but then took over full-time training when Costamato passed away. So Kevin Rooney's been there from day one, and all the shit that's going on in Tyson's mind at this time, he doesn't know who the right people are, clearly. Don King seems to be selling him this American dream, and he gets rid of the two people that were probably the most loyal to him as part of his camp, and then as a result of that, then goes in to this sort of little bit. This is where the downward spiral starts to come, in his boxing career as well as his outside personal life as well. You spoke about Robin Givens there and what she was like outside of the ring. For all intents purposes, she was a money-grabbing bitch, and we all knew it, and I think people that probably would have observed it from the outside in the 80s would have thought exactly the same, that it wasn't genuine. She was only ever in it for the money. She was what was known as a gold digger, and she certainly got her bloody gold off Tyson. And in terms of his boxing career, we've covered the Mike Tyson-Frank Bruno fight in the Legendary Nights episode of Tyson versus Douglas, so I don't want to touch too much into that because of obviously how much other significant things that have happened inside and outside the ring with Mike Tyson. So obviously, as we know, he beat Frank Bruno in what was a really good little contest in 1989, and then went on to knock out Carl the Truth Williams in the first round in July of 1989. Before we get to the next big significant fight in his career.
And we are live inside Korakuen Stadium in Tokyo, Japan, as HBO Sports presents World Championship Boxing. Tonight, undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson's 10th title defense against the challenger James Buster Douglas. It is scheduled for 12 rounds.
probably the most significant fight of his career. Now, this is, it sort of pains me to say it, to be honest, because for everything Tyson did leading up to this particular fight with James Buster Douglas, you know, he was known as the most ferocious fighter on the planet. People were talking about him as the greatest heavyweight that has ever lived, even past Ali, and that was a very, very bold statement to be making, and some people still even debate the hell out of it today. But the James Buster Douglas fight was, I feel that a lot of what people remember Tyson for, from the casual audience, is losing to Buster Douglas, losing his shit outside of the ring, and getting robbed of a load of money. And that is really, really sad to think about. That's how the perception of some people are with Mike Tyson. Boxing fans, real boxing fans, look at Mike Tyson as what he was leading up to the James Buster Douglas fight, where he was at his ferocious best, where people will theorise or fantasise how he could go on to beat someone like Muhammad Ali. But the James Buster Douglas fight, obviously everything in the lead up to that, as we've discussed in that Legendary Nights episode, the preparation wasn't great, the preparation was poor, and it was a writing on the wall situation, really. I think if we would have had social media in 1990 and we would have been able to get all these leaked footage of training and leaked footage of this and leaked footage of that, you probably would have seen how shit the preparations really, really were. And I don't think us trying to describe that does it any sort of justice, given how bad the preparations were for him inside and outside of the ring. But as history tells us, the biggest boxing upset in history was when James Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson in Tokyo to dethrone him of the WBC, WBA and IBF World Heavyweight titles.
Buster's legs actually look fresher to me. See Mike the way he went back in his heels, doesn't have the good balance. His legs together as Buster's landing these. Oh, nice uppercut by Buster Douglas. Look at this. He's knocked Mike Tyson down for the first time in his career. Mike Tyson hits the canvas. He's in big trouble. He may not be able to recover. It's up to 7 and 8. He's not gonna make it. Unbelievable! 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 Buster Douglas is the new heavyweight champion of the world.
Yeah, it was a huge moment in Tyson's career, and you know he had lost that, you know, the ability to, you know, I think to progress. He's still young and he still had a lot of potential, and he still had a lot to learn. And sort of getting rid of Rooney was a bad mistake, because I believe that if he was around in the corner, he could have just continued, and who knows what he could have gone on to do. But yeah, it was a shock victory. Douglas then obviously went on to lose to Evander Holyfield as well. So Tyson was sort of in a situation where now that's the big fight, where you know, Holyfield holds the titles, and Tyson's now become the contender. But you know, he was still in those. He was just in troubled times. You know, he was around bad people. He didn't have a good guy next to him in Don King. He was just always in it just for the money. Saying that, you know, he still went on, fought Henry Tillman, the guy we mentioned earlier, who beat him twice in the amateurs. Beat Tillman in just the first round. Also defeated Alex Stewart in the first round as well, before he had the 2 fights with Donovan Ruddock, Razor Ruddock. And you know, he TKO'd him in the 7th. That was also Builder's Fight of the Year. Again, loads, you know, it was 960,000 pay-per-view buys on the King network, King Vision. So King was raking it in still, even after the Buster Douglas fight, with the potential fight with Evander Holyfield, which was what everybody wanted. And then obviously he fought Ruddock again. This time it was even more on the pay-per-view front. It was 1,250,000 pay-per-view buys, also on the King Vision network. Billed as a rematch. And then this is where his life was already spiralling out of control, went into the deepest of deepest holes, and quite possibly, you know, it not only stopped Tyson in his tracks for the next 2 years or 6 years, whatever it was he went in for. Basically, it was 4 years he served, but it was just, you know, it was chaos. I mean, whether he did it or not, in terms of the rape, I mean, he's come out, recently, he came out on his documentary before and said that, you know, he's promiscuous and he didn't treat women too well, but he didn't touch this woman, and it's sort of, you don't know, at the end of the day, he was around bad people, and unfortunately for him, it ended up with a a prison sentence of 3 years, or he served 4.
But let's just take a little pause for one moment to give a shout out to the sponsors for BTR Boxing Podcast. It's Bear Attack Boxing, providing high quality boxing gloves, boxing equipment to your suitable needs. You can find them at www.bearattackboxing.co.uk and all over social media. You've got the Fight Pro 1 gloves, the Pluto gloves, the new Bear Attack Boxing t-shirt range, the inner gloves, the hand wraps, some great boxing products on there, so go and check them out. And also, we've got a little present for you. Because you're a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, we've got an exclusive discount code for you. Now, it's a 10% discount, and all you've got to do is when you're at the checkout and you've got them boxing gloves and that t-shirt in there that you want to buy, go onto the promo code and enter BTR10 for 10% off. And 10% is not something to be scoffed at in this day and age. It can definitely get you a few quid off them high quality products that Bear Attack Boxing are selling. So, as a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, when you buy or purchase something through Bear Attack Boxing's website, in the promo code, enter BTR10 and you will get an exclusive 10% discount off your basket. So please go and take advantage of it. Follow them on social media, Bear Attack Boxing, and it's bearattackboxing.co.uk. So, he was arrested in July 1991 for the rape of 18-year-old Desiree Washington, who at the time was Miss Black Rhode Island, and it was in an Indianapolis hotel room. This has apparently had taken place. So, it was loads of different intricate details around this. So there was partial corroboration of Desiree Washington's story came via testimony from Tyson's chauffeur Virginia Foster, who confirmed that Desiree Washington's state of shock after the incident, and further testimony came from Thomas Richardson in the emergency room, who was the physician who examined her more than 24 hours after the incident and confirmed that her physical condition was consistent with rape. So as a result, he goes to court, and on March 26, 1992, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison along with 4 years of probation at the age of only 25, which is where a lot of people will argue the best years of his career were lost due to this. And as you rightly pointed out, his new amount of interviews that Tyson has touched on this subject before about how he didn't treat women well and there was situations where he wished he could have changed, but the one thing he's always stayed consistent with is that he never raped this woman.
When I was falsely accused of raping that wretched swine of a woman, Desiree Washington, it was the most horrible time of my life. It was the most heinous day of my life because I go into prison, I lost my humanity, I lost my reputation, I lost everything that I worked so hard for. You know what I mean? To say that I was conducting myself as a little brat that time and being promiscuous with the women, I've done no such thing as took that woman's chastity at all. I have to be honest, I'm a jerk sometimes, and I say things that sometimes crass and coarse, but I would never do nothing to that extent. And whatever I did, I may have took advantage of women before, but I never took advantage of her. I don't know what to say about that situation. It just basically took the whole life out of me in that situation. I never again trusted anyone.
I'm not here to judge on anything to do with rape or victims of rape, and I'm not here to pass any type of judgment on Tyson or justify anything, because I will never know, you will never know, and the majority of the world will never really know what happened that night in that hotel room. However, for someone to vehemently deny the allegations and serve time for something that they say they didn't commit and still to this day say the same things they did 20 odd years ago, to me indicates that, you know, there could be an element of lies going on in this whole story. I mean, you look at this day and age, there's been a lot of incidents in the last 10 years where footballers have been accused of raping women, and one case in particular quite recently with a footballer named Ched Evans was supposed to have raped a woman in a room, and it actually turned out that this woman lied. And she was the one that ended up being convicted as a result, and he got his conviction overturned after spending a little bit of time in prison for it. So, these things do happen. Now, because of how mentally vulnerable Mike Tyson was and how easily led astray he was, could this have happened back then? Yeah, quite easily it could have happened back then. He was probably one of the most famous men on the planet at the time, given what he'd been doing inside the ring, how he was known for outside of the ring. He was the man on everybody's lips, he was the talking point. Obviously he loses to Buster Douglas and it's a big shock, and you hear all the controversy around that particular fight, and it could have quite easily been a case of they seen a vulnerable person who they could exploit, and there could have been even a potential that they was all in on it. But then again, this could have genuinely happened. This girl could have been raped and it could have traumatised her for the rest of their life. It's something that we will never know and never fully understand, but from our perspective, Tyson was then jailed and not released until 1995, which is when Don King got him out of prison and then got him to resume his boxing career.
Yeah, he came back after his little stint, as you say, come back with it released after just 3 years. And yeah, I'm with you. You don't know whether he was sure or not. We don't know, but as I say, he didn't surround himself with the best people. You wouldn't be surprised if people were in on it and making money off of him. He was a big star. He did come out eventually, and he came out and fought on the 19th of August 1995 against Peter McNeely.
Keep laughing. Real funny, huh? If any one of you that doesn't respect me or what I'm doing or what I've been doing for the last 3 months since it was been announced, and going against a guy like this, you'd have a big dump in your pants.
Talk to him, Peter.
And I'll read my final statement. I'm Hurricane Peter McNeely from Medfield, Mass. On Saturday night, watch me kick Tyson's ass. But if you haven't made your pay-per-view arrangements yet, make them soon. Because remember what happens when I wrap you in my cocoon.
And McNeely disqualified after his manager entered the ring, because obviously he was taking a beating. So he came back and, in that creepy, the bill was called He's Back, and it always just creeps me out because I always think, here's Johnny from The Shining. Here's Tyson back in the ring. God, lock up your daughters type of thing. But, Tyson obviously, he got rid of Peter McNeely by disqualification as it has on record. And then Buster Mathis Jr., who was also a good fighter. He was always a bit of a porky fella, Buster Mathis Jr., but he could box a bit, So it was a good couple of victories for him when he knocked him out in the third round before moving on to taking on Frank Bruno.
Yeah, just going back to the Peter McNeely fight as well, it was that much of an anticipated event, even though Peter McNeely had not really done anything of significance in his career. It actually grossed more than $96 million worldwide, including a United States record of $63 million for pay-per-view television, and the fight was purchased by 1.52 million homes, setting both pay-per-view viewership and revenue records, and that is absolutely immense. That's basically like Tyson coming out of retirement to fight a journeyman, essentially. and to get that sort of money for it is absolutely ludicrous. It just goes to show you the power of the man, really. He became even more of a hot commodity, even though he'd been put in prison for something that is one of the most heinous crimes that can be committed in life. So for him to come out and then be able to get that sort of money straight away, Don King knew what he was doing. Mr. Slippery makes another appearance on the podcast, ruining the career of one of the greatest heavyweights, what could have been the greatest heavyweight, arguably, on the planet, should he have not fell into the hands of guys like Don King. But he easily regained one of the world titles by beating Frank Bruno, as you said, in March 1996. And I remember it well because it was one of the first big major pay-per-view fights that I'd actually stayed up all night for. I was only at the age of 10 at this point, so it was a big thing, staying up to watch a big fight like this, only for Frank Bruno, the hero, to get absolutely obliterated by Tyson, and for Tyson to then obviously come back and be able to go and resume his career in the way he did. Now, in 1996, Lennox Lewis supposedly turned down a $13.5 million guarantee to fight Tyson at this point, which is something that is argued by Lewis, because Lewis always said he wanted to fight Tyson earlier than when he actually did. So what happened was Lewis then accepted a $4 million step-aside money to allow Tyson to fight Bruce Seldon. again for an expected $30 million. So if Tyson was to defeat Bruce Seldon, he would then fight Lewis next, and that was the way it was all worked out in the deals. So Tyson then added the WBA belt by defeating Seldon in the first round in September of 1996, and then was also talked about a bit of a throwback to when Sonny Liston seemingly looked like he threw the fight with Muhammad Ali, because Bruce Seldon was severely criticised and mocked in press because it looked like he collapsed from a few what looked like innocuous punches from Tyson.
Yeah, it did seem it was a little bit of a you do wonder, especially with Don King involved, whether it would have given him a bit of a payoff to take a little dive to pave the way for the big fight and make sure nothing happens. Obviously, probably thinking about the Buster Douglas fight and probably thinks, well, let's make sure he gets the win and we can get the Holyfield fight. But as you just was the other guy, he was the guy that was looking like he was going to be fighting him. And then on the other side of things, some people say that he sidestepped the challenge of Lennox Lewis for the WBA title because he opted for a more lucrative prospect of putting the WBA title on the line against Holyfield because there was more money involved. So maybe, who knows, it's a bit of both, isn't it, really? Did Lewis avoid him? Did Tyson sidestep him just for the more money? Maybe so. I think probably that's a bit more reasonable, where Tyson would have decided, actually, you know what, I'd rather fight Holyfield for more money. He probably was given the figures in front of him. You can fight Lewis for this much and you can fight Holyfield for this much, and he probably thought, well, why not? Let's fight Holyfield and let's earn the money. He obviously needed the money, saying that he was earning a shitload of it because obviously the Evander Holyfield fight was billed as finally. It was a 1.6 million pay-per-view buys, this one, and it was shown on Showtime and King Vision again. But yeah, Holyfield, I mean, it's a great fight again. I mean, the funny thing is with this, as you say, with people, spending the amount of money they 1.6 million buys against McNeely, and then the same amount of pay-per-view buys for Holyfield. It's interesting because people weren't necessarily looking at Tyson anymore as this ferocious guy who's so intimidating in boxing. He's just going to just get rid of a guy in no time, and everyone wants to see that. I think it was also the fact that they weren't too sure what we was going to get from Tyson. So that was like the extra intrigue with it, is what's he going to do next? Like, in the weigh-in or the post-fight or pre-fight interviews. You don't know. You're always expecting Tyson to do something crazy outside the ring, and I think that was where most of the public eye was looking at with Tyson. And Evander Holyfield, I think they felt that Evander Holyfield was shot, and that's why they took that fight over Lewis. And I think they felt that it'd be an easy night's work for him, and boy, were they wrong, because Holyfield quite simply beat Mike Tyson up.
Mike Tyson is a warrior too, and he's still gonna have that natural power. That's the last thing that'll go. Evander's got to be careful here to hold on, but he has fought a perfect fight.
No matter what happens from here on in, we are looking at a sports legend in the purple trunks, Evander Holyfield. Holyfield continues to dig in. A left hook to the head. He's got Tyson in trouble. Tyson's ready to go. A straight right hand. The Talbot stops the fight, and Holyfield has won.
I can't believe what I'm seeing. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever been privileged to witness.
Mayhem. It is bedlam.
Well, that's it, isn't it? He broke his heart, essentially, and there's a lot of sort of speculation around that fight, which led to a second fight between these two, where Holyfield was always known as a bit of a rough inside fighter, but there was a lot of instances where it looked like he was sort of butting Tyson in the fight, and as a result of that, obviously allegations were made from Tyson's camp of the frequent headbutts during the bout, although the headbutts were actually ruled as accidental by the referee. Don King and the Tyson camp were saying no, he was cheating to win, and that's how he ended up getting the jump on Mike Tyson, so they would become a point of contention, which led to this subsequent rematch. And for me, looking back on the first fight, it felt like Tyson just got overly frustrated. The fact that Holyfield is a rough fighter and he can throw a few dirty tactics in here and there, and he upset Tyson's rhythm, and Tyson just couldn't get into any sort of rhythm, got frustrated, and eventually went on to get stopped. But in the second fight, it was more evident that the frustration took over because of what happened in that particular fight. This was a big attraction. The second fight was billed even higher and grossed over $100 million. Tyson receiving 30 and Holyfield receiving 35. It was the highest paid professional boxing purses up until 2007, and it was purchased by 1.99 million households, setting a pay-per-view record, again up until the same date of May 5th, 2007, which was De La Hoya versus Mayweather. So this fight at this time become even more controversial, even more hyped, and it created one of the most controversial events in modern sports history. At the end of the third round, Tyson's getting really frustrated and decides, you know what, I'm just going to bite his ear. And he does once, and then he does a second time, and actually physically ripped off a piece of Holyfield's ear, prompting the referee, Mills Lane, to disqualify Mike Tyson for biting and ripping off the ear of Evander Holyfield.
Evander Holyfield now. A left hook.
You know, it's funny. Mike was having his best round.
He did it again. Mike Tyson has bitten Evander Holyfield for the second time, and it is all out war.
I saw that one. That was right clear. It's a miracle he didn't get bit back.
I'll tell you what, this is unbelievable.
Let's take two looks at that one. At that bite. Now here's the bite. Keep your eye on Mike. See, Mike has just look at him. You can see it. You can see it. There it is.
I can't believe what I'm seeing, fellas. They're going in real slow motion. Mike gets in a headlock, and look at this. He just reaches in and bites him.
It's over. It's over. During that replay, Mills Lane signaling that it's over. I think they've just about had enough. Tyson showing desperation in fighting Holyfield 2 times.
It's just the famous bite fight. I mean, what on earth was going on in his head? As you say, I mean, the first fight was pretty much a one-sided beatdown from Holyfield, and the second fight, again, was pretty much exactly the same. And I think for me, Tyson obviously thought when he said, you know what, there's no way I'm going to win this fight. And did he quit? I mean, in a way, he probably did. He probably just looked for a way out, didn't he? He didn't want to just quit and say, no, I don't want no more part of this, or no más saca Duran. He was thinking, actually, how can I get out of this? And he decided to have a nibble on his ear. First, initially, it was a little nibble. He got told off and warned with it. And then, obviously, the gun still comes out, and this time he literally bites a chunk of his ear off. And the craziness of it was that people couldn't believe what had just done. Obviously, it was like a melee in the ring. Everyone's going mad. Like, what on earth was going on? You got Holyfield holding his towel to his ear, pissing out with blood. You got fights breaking out all around the arena because people obviously put money on this fight and they're losing money, and everyone's sort of reared up and highly energised. So there's fights breaking out in the arena, in the casinos, even outside. It was just chaos. I mean, it's still one of the most. I can't even tell you when I watched that. It's just I can't believe that he's done it. It just shocks me. I don't think. We've seen it recently with Cash Ali biting Price. I mean, he didn't bite anything off, but he had a few nibbles in his chest, didn't he? And my goodness me, I mean, Tyson, when he does things for real. And I remember him walking to the ring. I remember seeing the images and everyone just lobbing stuff at Mike Tyson, like cups and stuff, as he's walking that long walk back to the changing room. And even after the fight, there's stories as well where someone called him something, and Tyson, you now a bit mellow and tired. He was going again. He was trying to attack this geezer for saying something to him, and he's got his entourage holding him back. So, this shows you where Tyson was at that time. And he was, even though he could calm himself down, he was so on the edge where you could say one thing and he would go again. So, and as I say, as we've quietly mentioned, with people he surrounded himself with, I don't think there was anyone there to put an arm around him and say, Tyson, mate, what's going on? Settle down and just try and sort this out, because that wasn't the people they were. Obviously, they were enjoying it. But absolute madness. Never seen anything like it in the ring. And credit to Holyfield, he just literally held his ears, put the towel on, and went off to the hospital to kick on. Holyfield's just a ledge, mate. Absolute nutter.
Yeah, no, this is the thing with Tyson. He made so many controversial moments outside the ring, but just as many inside the ring. So after losing by disqualification to Evander Holyfield for a second time, he was out of the ring for 2 years. Come back in January 1999, beat Franz Bova, then had fights with Orlin Norris before coming in to the UK. And this was controversial because obviously Frank Warren had managed to broker a deal to get Tyson over to fight in Manchester against Julius Francis. Now initially he was denied a visa to come over, but eventually they managed to get that period of time where they got him over, and that was great for British fans because obviously the British British fans that loved Tyson wanted to see him. So it was two fights that he took place in 2000. The first one was in January, staged at the MEN Arena against Julius Francis. Obviously, they managed to get him into the country. Frank Warren had brokered that deal, and he only took 4 minutes to knock out Francis, ending the bout in the second round. He then also fought Lou Savarese in June of 2000 in Glasgow, winning in the first round. That fight only lasted 38 seconds. But again, controversy follows Tyson wherever he goes. He carried on punching after the bell, after the referee had stopped the fight, and the referee was in the middle of them stopping the fight, and Tyson just carrying on throwing digs, and he ends up knocking the referee to the floor. And it's just more absolute crazy moments again from Tyson. Again, this is just Mike Tyson all over at this period of time, you know, mentally unstable and just wanted to hit and hurt anything he could get a hold of.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing as well, with, when he went on to fight Andrew Gallotta as well, I mean, that fight was actually originally retired win for Tyson, but later ruled a no contest after he tested positive for cannabis, which is actually quite funny considering what he's currently doing at the moment, where he's like the face of cannabis at the moment in America in terms of, you know, he's earning a mint from it, to be fair to him. But so to me, you know, there's nothing wrong with Mike Tyson having a joint, I'll tell you that, because if he did, there's one thing that it might actually settle him down a little bit. Maybe he needed that. Maybe whoever gave him that first joint after sort of having a munching on Holyfield's ear must have settled him down. But then obviously not quite, because he still has that temper. So I think, to be fair to him, I think it's not a bad idea for him to be having a dabble in cannabis, because I do think it makes him much more mellow, that's for sure.
So after this particular point then against Gallotta, we move on, and he's calling Lennox Lewis out in obviously what was one of the most controversial post-fight interviews ever, after beating Lou Savarese.
I only trained probably 2 weeks or 3 weeks for this fight. I had to bury my best friend, and I dedicated this fight. I wasn't going to fight. I dedicated this fight to him. I was going to rip his heart out. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lennox is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from Nairclaw. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
That was another... I like to say it's great, but it is great, and it's not, because it gives you memories where you just laugh and think about how Tyson just said this shit, you know, in post-fight interviews. But it's memorable. It's memorable for us as fans. The moment when he was speaking about Lennox Lewis and how he was Jack Dempsey and he was Sonny Liston all rolled into one, and there's nobody who can match him, and you know, he was going to eat Lennox's kids, and it was just absolutely mental. And he was wanting this fight with Lennox Lewis. And, you know, there's a reason why he wanted to fight with Lennox Lewis at this point of his career, is because he wanted money. Let's be honest, they could have fought each other 6 years before. They eventually signed to fight each other for June 2002, another significant moment, and we've covered this particular incident off on the Best Boxing Brawls episode. If you've not checked that out, go and check it out. Brilliant episode. And it was the moment where it was big hype for this fight. It'd been, you know, 6 years, 7 years too late, I suppose, but we all wanted to see it. It was happening. They get on the podiums across the opposite stage from each other. Tyson goes storming over, starts throwing punches, ends up getting Lewis to the floor, bites Lewis in the leg. It's just absolutely manic. And then after all that had ensued, he's kicking off with the journalist who was shouting about him going in the straitjacket.
You punk ass white boy. Come here and tell me that if I fuck you in your ass, you punk white boy, you faggot. You can't touch me, you're not man enough. I eat your asshole alive, you bitch. Fuck you, you hoe. Come and say in my face, fuck you, ass for everybody. You bitch. Come on, you bitch. You're scared coward. You're not man enough to fuck with me. You can't last 2 minutes in my world, bitch. Look at you scared now, you hoe. Scared like a little white pussy. Scared of the real man. I'll fuck you till you love me, faggot.
And it's just absolutely crazy. One of the craziest presses and advertisements for fights you've ever seen.
Yeah. Oh God. And even with the journalist shouting it with a punk ass white boy, and I'm gonna fuck you till you love me. That is just still one thing that will. Jeez, man, that shit gives me nightmares thinking about Mike Tyson. To me, that geezer did not say well that night, and even then he had a nibble on Lewis End, and he bit his leg as well. So Tyson obviously no, he didn't need a straitjacket, but I think he needed a Hannibal Lecter mask as well, because he was just off his head, the geezer. But yeah, I mean, it was a big fight. I mean, I remember it sort of the nights before, and with friends, and going through it with my pal, and he was a bit taller than me, and I was trying to demonstrate how Lewis is going to win this fight. Just going to keep him in his jab, and then he's saying, no, but you can get underneath him. But you know, it got that talk. Everybody was talking about it again. It was, you know, it was a big fight. It was a huge fight. And it was still, people still felt that Tyson had something left, and he could get rid of Lewis. And I think Lewis that night proved to everybody that he was the king of the heavyweight division at that time. And he finally did beat Mike Tyson. And obviously Tyson, you know, I don't think he was anywhere near his peak. Lewis will say that he is. It would have been interesting to have seen them two in their peaks if it had been a few years earlier, because I think it would have been a different story. But another good fight and a good win for Lewis. And at the end of the day, Tyson, he made himself a nice few million from that fight as well.
He certainly did. It was a great, like I say, great event. The whole dual announcement of it, the security guys all across the ring separating him so there wasn't any scuffles that would have ensued literally in the ring before the fight took place. But the fight itself was one of Tyson trying to come out early to blast Lewis away, and Lewis at this point was in his element. It was in his peak. This was sort of the best Lewis, and he was able to dispatch of Mike Tyson quite handily within 7-8 rounds of the fight. And then Tyson would then go on to carry on his career for a little bit longer, but during the midst of that he was filing for bankruptcy as well at the time. So as a result of that, he needed money desperately, which is a lot of the reasons why a lot of fighters do end up continuing on the career past the best. Now, in August of that year, August of 2003, after years of the financial struggles that he'd suffered, he actually filed for bankruptcy. And on August the 13th, 2003, he entered the ring for a face-to-face confrontation against the K1 fighting phenom, Bob Sapp, immediately after Sapp had just been in the ring and beat Kimo Leopoldo in Las Vegas. So K1 had signed Tyson to a contract with the hopes of making a fight between the two, but because of obviously Tyson's felony history, it was impossible for him to gain a visa to fight in Japan, where the fight would have been the most profitable. So as a result, after discussing alternative locations, the fight ultimately failed to happen, which is crazy to think about, and it's something I never even knew about, and I don't even remember this from around that period of time, that actually Tyson was going to sign to fight in K1, which for anybody who doesn't know what K1 is, it's kickboxing. It's a kickboxing, it's like, you know, you have UFC, mixed martial arts. K1 is kickboxing specifically. So Mike Tyson was going to be involved potentially in a kickboxing bout, but this is a sad state of affairs really, because this is the point where he needs to earn as much money as he possibly can. So he's trying to get as much money as he can because of all the debts and the shit he's been left with over the years because of the poor choice he's made and the poor team that he had around him. So he decides then to get back in the ring once again. On July 30th, 2004, he comes in against British boxer, very own Danny Williams, in another comeback fight which was staged in Kentucky in what was another big upset, and another big upset for a British fighter on the roads, because nobody expected Danny Williams to actually go in there and do anything, because Tyson was dominating the early exchanges. And then when Tyson started to get through on Williams, you're thinking this is going to be another easy night, but Tyson was stopped. He was stopped in the 4th round by Danny Williams, but that was because his leg went. Now, he ended up fighting on one leg for that 4th round because he'd torn a ligament in his knee in the 1st round, so nobody had knew that he'd actually fucked his knee up in the 1st round, and he'd actually managed to go through 3 other rounds before being stopped by Danny Williams, which was, for British fans, it was huge because nobody expected a journeyman like Danny Williams to go in there and stop a guy like Mike Tyson. For Danny Williams, that would ultimately lead to a fight with Vitaly Klitschko, in which he got soundly beaten by Klitschko, but that was a big moment in his career. And for Tyson, at this point of his career, it was a sad state of affairs. It was all about the money. He had one more final fight, losing to Kevin McBride in 2005.
Yeah, it was a pretty sad end because he basically retired, didn't he, in that fight. He gave up in the 6th round and then ended up retiring from the sport altogether. And it was all money motivated. That's all it was at this point. After the Lennox Lewis fight, you'd have thought he'd have earned enough money, win or lose. Maybe if he could maybe get a rematch along the line with Lewis, earn himself a bit more. But, he came back, as you say, he had those last 3 fights. As a surprise victory for me. I mean, who would have expected Danny Williams to win that fight? Whether his knee went or not, I mean, that is a big upset and a huge achievement for Danny. And obviously, as you say, Klitschko dealt with Danny after that. But yeah, Tyson, that was basically, after the McBride fight, that was it. He called it a day on June 11, 2005. And, I mean, when you look back on his career, I mean, what an incredible fighter he was, especially in those early days, in those peak days. And then, obviously, he went into an absolute abyss midway through it. Sort of came back, to be fair to him, and won world titles once again. But yeah, he'd always just, for me, he'd always just been known as just this ferocious, terrifying guy in the ring, and he just absolutely demolished any opponent that stepped in front of him. And it was literally, as I get older and you start reading more about Tyson, and that's when you realise that it was his life that really impacted on his career. I mean, everyone on my road who lived in and around my area, everybody had a Mike Tyson VHS indoors. For the youngsters, that is a videotape, an old videotape. It was always great to watch his fights, and that was how I fell into him from a young age. I always knew about Mike Tyson. Obviously, I was a Frank Bruno. I loved Bruno. He was my guy, and I always wanted Bruno to beat Tyson. Never happened, but Mike Tyson was just a great fighter, and you just wonder if Cuss had survived a bit longer, or if Tyson was born a bit later. I don't know if there was any way that Cuss could have managed to been around Tyson to be able to nurture him when he became heavyweight champion, because that was the problem, when he became that superstar and you just had too many people around him and he just wasn't educated enough to work out who the good people were and who the bad people were. And I'm sure now today, I mean, I don't listen to his podcast. I should probably listen to his podcast because he is a great, he was one of the best fighters in the heavyweight era. In any era, I think he could have beaten anybody. We just don't know. And we look back and we can say he could beat this guy and that guy. But he was a great fighter in his day. And like you say, that top of his career was a Spinks fight. But a great, career profiles when it comes to doing someone like Mike Tyson, it's just so much information. And I'm sure there's plenty with Michelle, but well, what a great career profile to do.
Well, in terms of his legacy then, in 1998, a ranking of the greatest heavyweights of all time by the Ring magazine placed Tyson at number 14 on the list. Despite criticism of facing underwhelming composition during his run as champion, Tyson's knockout power and intimidation factor made him the sport's most dynamic box office draw. So, that's true. I don't know. That was 1998's ranking. I don't know what the rankings are now and where people would place him at. But in terms of most fan versions of top 10s or top 20s, Tyson is always in there. Some people he's in the top 10. For some people he doesn't make the top 10. It's very subjective. It's a very subjective list. But for me personally, the impact he had on the sport during that period of time, and for what he did in terms of unifying a division in that period of time, for me, he has to be in the top 10, and that is just my personal opinion. Again, subjective. People will sit there and debate different facts till the cows come home with this, but for me, for what he did at that period of time, unifying a heavyweight division, beating who was put in front of him at that time, which were the best fighters, beating guys like Michael Spinks, who was undefeated, he was a former light heavyweight champion, beating all the guys that he could beat at the time, and it was more the outside life that spoiled his career. It's very well documented about everything that happened outside of the ring made a huge impact on what he did inside of the ring. And our first career profile was about Muhammad Ali and about the significant things he did outside of the ring, in contrast to the way Tyson's life went outside of the ring. It just goes to show you what a difference good management, a good team around you and good people around you could make to a career of a fighter because of the way Muhammad Ali is always remembered against how Mike Tyson is always remembered. And for me, that is the biggest comparison to make when it comes to looking at Tyson as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. It's a shoulda, woulda, coulda situation with Mike Tyson. He could have been the greatest heavyweight of all time, but will always go down as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and in some people's minds doesn't even make the top 10. But his life after boxing has actually been nice to see. Now, he's actually come out of the other side of all the shit he's had to put up with during his career. He's had various incidents, obviously, where he's been arrested, and he's had little bits of time where he's obviously struggled to pay the bills, of course. There was one period of time where he actually came back to come and pay his debts off, so he returned to the ring in 2006 for a series of 4-round exhibition bouts against journeyman heavyweight Corey Sanders. And Tyson didn't actually wear any headgear, but Corey Sanders did, and he's been involved in some little exhibition bouts. I've seen him in these charity things with people like, I don't know if it was Shaquille O'Neal or a basketball player. I know he was involved in like a little exhibition with one of them as well. And he was just doing what he needed to do to pay the bills. But I think what was more significant for me was when they brought the Tyson documentary out in around 2012. When they did that documentary about him and about his life and about him, we got to see more of an insight to what Mike Tyson is like today, the mentality, the realisation of how things have been really fucked up in his life in compared to what other people have had given to them on a plate. And then when he went on his Undisputed tour, it was just nice to see that he turned his life around completely. And as you talked about at the start of the episode, Johnston, the fact that, you know, he's now gone on to open this cannabis farm and he's got this whole, you know, podcast going on, and there's so many different avenues of revenue for him now that it seems like he obviously, you know, his things have gone a lot better for him in his life. And obviously, you know, he had children. He's got quite a few children, 7 of them in particular. Unfortunately, you know, I've got to touch on it, but one of them unfortunately passed away in a tragic accident at his home involving gym equipment. And when you watch the video of him talking about the passing of his daughter, it's so hard to watch. It's so emotional. Anyone that's got children will totally relate to that, and anyone that hasn't, anyone who's human can totally relate to a man in pain. And you know, one of the baddest men on the planet brought to tears by something that's so traumatic that's happened in his life.
This is my best thinking at the time. Get my gun, automatic, just like this, and you just go crazy.
Who are you gonna hurt?
Regardless. That's just my first thought. But when I went to the hospital, the people that were there, they're up there because their kids are dead too. Mm-hmm. Or about to die. Mm-hmm. So, who the hell am I? Their kids are dying too. I don't know. No. It's something happened that day. I don't know what happened that day.
But whatever happened that day, was there a new Mike Tyson that came the next day?
No, I did some cocaine for a week. I had to get high. I had to back then. I had to get high. I couldn't handle it at all. You have to go. No, you understand, right? Thank you.
But it's good to see where he is now in his life. I'm really happy, you know, as a fight fan, first and foremost, that he's actually been able to turn it around. And as fans now in this day and age, we're getting the benefit of hearing all these stories. We're getting the benefit of hearing everything from him, because this could have quite easily gone a completely different route, and we could have ended up talking about Tyson as someone that ended up passing away due to a drug overdose, or something that could end up leading on to suicide, or, you know, there's a lot of things that happen in the world that can lead on to things like this. And everything that Tyson's been through, for him to come out the other side of it the way he has, for me, has been an absolute pleasure to see.
Definitely, and I think him sort of investing in the cannabis farm in America at the minute, I think that's a great move from him, because he's going to earn an absolute fortune. It's big business out there, and that was a great move from him. I don't know if that was something he thought of himself or if he was advised to do it, because that's going to earn him a lot of money, and stable money as well. And the last thing you want is these guys to be in this situation where having all these millions and all of a sudden just it all going, and then they just, you know, they're potless, and, you know, they end up going through some craziness in their lives and doing stupid things. Thankfully, He's obviously got older, he's got more mature, he's got wiser. He speaks a lot about his, from the bits I've seen in his documentary and other bits and bobs that you get to listen to, is that, he's quite happy to speak about his career, and he's quite open about the things that has happened to him. People ask him a question and he'll respond. I think there was one incident where someone in a chat show asked him something and he didn't like it, and he basically was going to say he's going to punch him up or something, he's going to hit him if he keeps asking him, and he just didn't know what to do in this interview. Just one funny thing, it's just that side of Tyson, it's always there, isn't it? He can quite easily snap, but recently we've not heard too many bad things about Tyson, which is good. We used to hear it all the time, but growing up there was always something happening. Mike Tyson, he'd be on the news at some point, him doing something crazy. So it's good that he's got a family and he's able to maybe just having a podcast and being able to speak and people listen. I think that's probably good therapy for him. And as I say, if he's partial to a joint or two, that's not a bad thing because that'll mellow him out anyway. So Mike Tyson, as you say, I wouldn't put him. I'd put him in my top 10. I would, or heavyweight greats. I probably would. I think the one thing that the fact that he lost his titles and he did come back and he did win back, but I don't know, it wasn't quite up there with Ali or like a Joe Louis for me. I think they're just a level above. Slightly. Even Larry Holmes, I know he distracted Larry Holmes. It's difficult to say that would he finish above Larry if he was going to do your all-time greatest list. Jack Johnston, for instance, that guy would go ahead of him. So, but definitely in the top 10, Mike Tyson, if not pushing the top 5. But a great fighter. It's not his fault that he was, the pool wasn't deep. No, there were still some brilliant names on his resume, but unfortunately, he didn't have that massive marquee name. The two fights, obviously losing twice to Holyfield and then Lewis. If he'd have won one of them, maybe you could have pushed him up. But, by then, the prison sentence killed him and Don King killed him. And that's why I've got no respect for him. He was a young kid, Tyson, and he was influenced by the people around him. He just needed better guidance, and he could have become the greatest ever heavyweight champion, absolutely. But it's great to hear the aftermath is that he's doing well, and I hope it continues, basically. And, again, it's just a great career profile, and thanks to the listeners and the people that voted, because, it's been a pleasure doing it.
It certainly has been a pleasure for doing it, and thank you for everybody that did take part in the vote. It got over 400 votes. It was a really, really good vote. It was really chuffed to see the reaction to this particular poll, so thank you very much for that. And as I said at the top of the show, Ernie Shavers will go in there at some point, of course. This was a hard-hitting heavyweight one, but Ernie Shavers obviously deserves one in his own right, and he'll get one at some point down the line. So thank you to everybody that's listened to this episode. I hope you've really thoroughly enjoyed our take on the career profile of Mike Tyson. If you have, let us know at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook. If you've not already subscribed to us, please go and do so on Apple Podcasts or Podbean, Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM, even Spotify. If you've not already rated us, please go and do it, because it significantly helps us get up the rankings, in particular in the Apple Podcast rankings chart. It helps us get up there. It helps us get the exposure to the mainstream audience to see all the quality work that comes out of what we do on a regular basis. So thank you very much to everybody. We'll hope you've enjoyed this episode of Career Profiles, the career profile of the baddest man on the planet, Mike Tyson.